Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming at such a late notice. We wanted to try to get some information out to you, and today's really kind of a good day and to talk about a couple things. And one thing that I want to first start with is most of you know who have been in the media and been around a little bit is in law enforcement is every day is something new and every day is something unexpected. And we're very fortunate here at this sheriff's office that we had an incident a couple weeks ago where a deputy Ryan Frayling had a close call going out to serve what appeared to be a normal civil eviction notice. And for those of you who follow law enforcement know that when you least expect things to happen, the worst case scenario will happen. We see that over and over again. We saw that here in the west coast of Florida in the Tampa-St. Pete area last year. So the training, everything we do, it keeps our people healthy. It keeps our people alive in many cases. And when that deputy went to a house or a residence here just 2 blocks from this area 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, he had a violent confrontation with an armed suspect who was really trying to take his life. And the deputy did a wonderful job by defending himself and defending a couple people that were with him by returning fire and striking the individual. But when we talk about things like that, the unexpected, what would appear just to be a simple eviction notice by a deputy doing his job every day, many times evolves into other things we learn later. And in this case, we were very fortunate of some of the things, number one, by our deputy defending himself and staying alive and returning fire and defending the people with him. But we also were able to gain information off this individual who was involved in that shooting. Before we talk about that, I want to introduce a couple other people just so you guys know, because I'm going to let them talk to you here in a little bit because I think you'll find it interesting. Captain Jeff Bell is with our Criminal Investigations Bureau here. He is our captain over all of our criminal investigations. I'm going to look over here, Lieutenant Skip Wood. Real quick about Skip, he's going to be retiring here soon. He's our forensic supervisor, 29 years with the Sheriff's Office. And for those of you who have been around this Sheriff's Office since I've been here, know I had talked about how important forensics is to law enforcement nowadays and how far it's come. Michael Gorn is here with us today too. He is our forensic supervisor in our forensics unit, and our automatic fingerprint identification system supervisor, Brenda Vienna, is here with us too. And so what's really, what I want to give to you here in a minute, I'm going to give it to Captain Bell to talk to you about a situation that we resolved. What we feel good about is this team has helped us out with the murder investigation. For those of you who follow here locally, last March of 2011, Karen Courts was violently murdered in the Kensington Park area here in Sarasota County. And these individuals have been working that case over and over in trying to get to some resolution to that case. And I'm going to ask Captain Bell to step in here and talk a little bit about how the case of the shooting with the deputy 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, where the deputy defended himself, and what we learned during that case with these forensics people when they went to do that forensic scene of that case, what they garnished out of that location, which has given us information to go back and look at the Kensington Park murder of Karen Courts, and how we feel very good about where we're at right now and why this gentleman's in jail and will probably stay in jail by the time we get all done with. So, Captain, I'm going to have you come on in and talk about it.
Could you say and spell your first and last name on channel, please?
Sure. Thank you, Sheriff. My name's Captain Jeff Bell, and last name is B-E-L-L.
Jeff, J-E-O, J-E-F-F?
J-E-F-F, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. As the Sheriff mentioned, we started investigating the murder of Karen Courts back on March 31st. And when we responded to that crime scene, detectives went out there, and during the course of that investigation, we discovered that there was a burglary across the street as well. And there was a victim, Mr. Solie, that lived across the street that, as we were tending to the murder scene, notified us that his house had been burglarized. In the course of that investigation, we also had forensics responding, obviously, to the murder scene, but they also then had to take charge of the crime scene of the burglary across the street. And we really had no confirming evidence at that point that the crimes were related, but obviously, because of the proximity and the timing, we suspected that that may be the case. So as the investigators worked, on interviewing and trying to determine who the suspects were, the forensic team got together and they went to work on the crime scenes and trying to develop what kind of evidence there was in those particular two cases and see if they were related or if we could determine they were unrelated. And if you remember at the time also, while we were at the house investigating those crimes, we later that night recovered the Karen Quartz vehicle at the Sarasota Square Mall, or Westfield Mall. And there was some videotape that was recovered that showed someone walking away from her vehicle, and the time on that video, which we received from the SCAT transportation system, showed that that vehicle was attended and then left at that location around the same time that we were processing the crime scenes. All things considered, some of the best evidence that was recovered from the burglary scene, where there was a point of entry was a jealousy window that was compromised, and that was the point of entry to the burglary that Mr. Solie found at his residence. And left at the scene was some blood of what we believed to be a suspect at the time from that he incurred an injury at the time that the entry was gained, as well as some latent fingerprint evidence that was recovered from the pane of glass. The other evidence, forensic evidence at the scene, was a shoe pattern, a shoe impression, which became quite significant in the case later on when we processed the homicide scene in Karen Quartz. Inside her residence was located the same shoe impression, and that shoe impression was actually in her blood. So that was around the time that we first began to strongly consider the fact that the crimes were related, and we processed not only the murder scene, the burglary scene, but also the vehicle forensically. And when the results came back, we had sent some testing off to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and there was the first thing we did with the fingerprints is we have an automated fingerprint system which searches computerized records both locally, state, and nationally. And what we determined from that is the latent prints that were lifted from the crime scene did not match anyone. So that was our first indication that there was the person, our suspect, if in fact those latent prints belonged to our suspect, that the suspect had no criminal record, which obviously is, makes our task a little bit harder. And knowing that the crimes were connected, a murder of this type, and how brutal it was, and for it to be someone that's never been in the system was a bit unusual for us to encounter and to really grasp. And then we used the video from the mall, and we really didn't get an identification from that, a direct identification from that. And the APHIS prints didn't come back. We sent off the blood from the burglary scene, and we got back a male profile, DNA profile from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And we also received a partial male profile from the vehicle. But the vehicle had been cleaned quite a bit, and you could tell there's some items missing from it. But nonetheless, there was a partial profile from the vehicle, and it was consistent with the male profile that was lifted from the crime scene of the burglary. And really, we kept going back to our best evidence was the latent fingerprints and then the shoe impressions that were recovered from the burglary scene and the homicide scene. And from that, we have fortunate enough to have as one of our supervisors of our crime scene unit is Michael Gorn, and he's here with us today. And Mike is an expert in shoe impressions, and he used some of his resources and his natural knack and interest in that particular type of evidence. And I know for a fact that he began a quest to find this particular shoe pattern. And it came back to a New Balance shoe, and there's a specific, not only brand but type, and the detectives really worked hard to develop suspects. We really couldn't come up with any suspects. That's been pretty much documented, and there's been some reports about it. But between the shoe impressions and the fingerprints, as well as the blood, we've been searching for over a year. And the other day when Deputy Frayling responded to that house and got, as the sheriff said, fortunately from the grace of God, was defended his own life and the life of someone else, which I really can't say enough about what he did in that particular situation. I know that probably a deputy of a lesser character or caliber may not have survived that. So I would definitely send some kudos out to him for what he did and the action he took. But as a result of that, when Mr. Case was taken into custody, it's our normal procedure to collect his clothing, and that was collected at the scene. And coincidentally enough, our forensic group was there at the scene, and as his clothing, including his shoes, were brought to the forensic team, they were in a clear plastic bag, and Mike Gorn took one look at them, and he realized, he said, "Those are the shoes I've been looking for a year." And had never seen, even though it's not an extremely uncommon shoe, the particular pattern and the type of shoe, he had not encountered it in all the work that he's done in the last year. And I'll be honest with you, I was still pretty skeptical that, okay, well, it's a pair of shoes, but it wasn't just any pair of shoes to him. And so we started checking into who William Case was. And one of the things that was puzzling to begin with was he has no driver's license. There was no pictures in his house. We found nothing with his name or address or ID, no particular ID, no credit cards, totally off the grid. And to the point where we then became suspect of who he actually was. And we went through some extraordinary efforts because he wasn't in jail, he was in a medical facility. And our forensic people went out and they rolled his prints. And they brought the prints back in, and we suspected that he may have been using an alias. And we actually compared his prints to some other aliases and confirmed that, he didn't match any of those. And the following morning, when our APHIS supervisor came in, she asked about, the prints, that were rolled. And it was a little unusual circumstances, but as they talked amongst themselves, they had shared information between some of the forensic crime scene techs and the supervisors. They shared information that, about the shoes. And that led the people in APHIS to want to compare those fingerprints to the latent prints that were located at the crime scene of the burglary. And when they did that, their expert testimony and identification told us that there were 4 latent prints lifted from the point of entry of the burglary at Mr. Solis' house. and those 4 latent prints belong to William Case. So that in and of itself was kind of the second major piece for us to put together the pieces of the puzzle and the evidence that we had in front of us. And then, of course, we went back and we looked at the video from the mall and from the bus. And certainly, Mr. Case resembles the person that's depicted in the video walking away from Karen Courts' vehicle. And
With the bag.
yes, and he's carrying a bag in his hand, and it's kind of like a briefcase, a leather carry-all type bag. It has a large strap on it. And there was a determination by one of the investigators after viewing the videotape and having been at the crime scene of the shooting involving Deputy Frayling that that the bag that he had over his shoulder at the time he brandished the weapons, the firearms at Deputy Frayling, is believed to be the same bag that he's carrying as he's walking away from Karen Courts' vehicle. So all in all, at this point, that's led us to the burglary charges that we've levied against Mr. Case today. We have conducted search warrants at his residence and also on his person. We've received biological evidence from him that will do comparisons. We've sent off for comparisons with FDLE, and we'll await for some of that evidence to come back for consideration of comparison and matching not only to the burglary scene but also to the partial profile that was obtained from the vehicle. And we'll continue to work with the state attorney's office in regards to additional charges. But we obviously, from everything I told you today, we're extremely proud of the efforts that not only our investigators have put into this, but our forensic team. We're very satisfied that we've done our due diligence and stayed the course, even though it's been quite some time, and it's in service to the victim and people in Sarasota County and the family. That we really believe that these things come together, and having seen a number of these investigations, it's the hard work that they put in, and because they care and they spend those extra hours and they put that extra effort in there, and these people have a knack for what they do.